Morning, everybody. Welcome to the News Agenda live from the Labour Party conference. I'm Fleet Street Fox, and joining me this morning is Dhesi, the MP for Slough, our first Turban Sikh MP, and the recently elected chairman of the Defence Select Committee. So thanks for joining us, Tan.
Pleasure.
Now, this is a People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We will do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to ask yourself who'd want to buy your clothes. Now, speaking of which, Tan, I've got to ask, first question, who paid for your turban?
Well, I would like to say that the sartorial schools are thanks to my wife. She makes
It
sure
matches perfectly with your tie.
I always dress to impress. I knew I was going to be with you this morning, Susie, so I wanted to make sure that the Daily Mirror viewers had a well-dressed MP. But yes, it is my wife that makes sure that she goes out with me to make sure that I am properly dressed.
Getting stuff off. So it comes out of the Dhesi funds, not anywhere else.
Don't worry, there is no Dhesi retirement fund, or there is no such fund that exists.
We're all trying to find Lord Ali here for this week. We're all trying to grab him for something, pick his pockets full out. Now, what do you make of the furore that we've seen in the last week or so about the freebies that some of the front bench ministers have had? Because they've had to go out and defend it over and over again. Angela Rayner said yesterday, Liverpool politicians have this. They have people trying to give them gifts. And it's just someone, I think Rachel Reeves said this morning, it's just someone trying to help me look a bit smarter when I was running the election campaign. What's your take on it?
Look, unlike the US and certain other countries, that there isn't a big fund for all of this stuff. And look, I want to make sure that all the viewers know that there is nothing illegal that has happened. So everything has been properly registered. And unlike what Boris Johnson and others did, where, by the way, just in one incident, when the likes of us took him to task for his gold leaf wallpaper and everything else, more than 100 grand, which he, by the way, he tried to hide, unlike here, where everything is being registered in the register of members' interests as it should be. But look, the likes of me, look, we want to move on from this, right? This is not what people in Slough and people across the country are talking about. People want to see this government addressing the issues of the day, the policies. What I have come to Liverpool for is to make sure that the government, which has promised change, how is it going to deliver change? How is it going to make the lives of my Slough constituents better? How are we going to make sure that we tackle the cost of living crisis? And it's just generally about tackling the NHS crisis, making sure that if we're saying we're going to build 1.5 million homes, how are we going to be doing that? All of those things are the things that matter. But look, I think those in government have listened and changes have been made. And I hope that we can move on to actually talk about the real issues of the day.
Yeah, it can be a bit frustrating, I expect, can't it, really? So we're going to be talking about the main stories of the day here at conference, but also, Tan, you've got to ask, you've been an MP since 2017, back in the days of Jeremy Corbyn. You've done the long, hard slog in opposition. And Keir was saying yesterday, we need to celebrate. We won. Yes. There's one person I've met so far at conference who said, oh my God, we've won. Everyone else seems a bit gritted teeth and a bit more depressed and down about it. How do you feel? How does it feel to be here, having now become part of government?
The only bit depressing is the weather, right? I've just been in a long queue outside in order to come into the venue, but that also speaks volumes about the level of attendance. It's huge, this conference. It is the annual jamboree, but it is a time to enthuse ourselves. And look, there is a lot of excitement. A lot of us are seeing that enthusiasm, but I know some of the headlines might not have been what we wanted and the sort of issues that we wanted out there, and some of the difficult decisions that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have been talking about. But ultimately, we need to celebrate the fact that after 14 long years, it is a Labour government. We're coming here to Liverpool to celebrate the fact that we are in government. We can actually implement the policies that we want, rather than just having a go at the Tories. Right? I love making speeches against the Tories. I've been doing that for the last 7 odd years, holding them to account. But I'd rather be holding to account a Labour government and to make sure that they are promising the change that we promised.
Okay. So what do you think, everybody? How do you feel about the furore about freebies for frontbench ministers? Do you think it's been blown out of proportion? Do you find it frustrating, as Tan says, that we're not discussing some of the other things that have happened since then? Or do you think this is really important? Does it matter to you? And we'll, get us the questions and let us know. Now, you've not got a cabinet post, Tan, but you have won the election for the very coveted and influential job of chairman of the Defence Select Committee. Now, it's that committee's job to put the defence team under scrutiny, to really hold their feet to the fire. But you were in sort of the shadow government, you had a shadow ministerial post. How is it going to work with you holding, your former very close colleagues, I suppose, to account like that? Are you going to be able to do it in the same way you did the Tories?
Well, first of all, I want to thank my colleagues. And by the way, when I say colleagues, all 650 MPs have a vote. So it's quite an undertaking. It is a sophisticated electorate.
You voted for by Tories, Tan?
By Tories, Lib Dems, Greens, SNP, the full shebang. So it is a very sophisticated electorate, as I said. You've got to prepare leaflets, you've got to go and convince colleagues, and you cannot win the trust and confidence of the whole House without, whether it's opposition MPs, government MPs, everybody thinking that you are the right person for that job. So, you're right. It is a very powerful and influential committee, and it works best and it's cross-party. So before I went onto the front bench, became a shadow minister 4 years ago, prior to that, I was serving on the Defence Committee. But I had to give up on the Defence Select Committee, as well as when I was a delegate, a UK delegate on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, because if you go on the front bench, then you should not be on select committees. You should not be doing other things that hold governments to account and hold the front bench to account. But now my role is different. The mandate that I have is from Parliament. It is not an appointed position from the Prime Minister. It is your job as a select committee chair, but also the other members who are going to be elected next month, all of us working on a cross-party basis to do that. And my first official meeting with the Defence Secretary, John Healey, was where I said, look, we're going to be supportive, but also scrutinising. So we will be looking at everything in detail. And I know that, look, you and the Daily Mirror, you've done great work, whether it's been on nuclear veterans, whether it's lots of other campaigns for our veterans, in terms of defence procurement. You've got issues around an increasingly volatile world. So the Defence Committee is going to be crucial, whether it's looking at our alliances, NATO, Five Eyes, AUKUS, and lots more besides. GCAP, the new initiative between the UK, Japan and Italy. All of these alliances matter, and we will be making sure that is the government doing enough to support Ukraine? Is it doing enough around the world to lead not only to a safer home, but also to a more stable environment globally?
Yeah. Okay. Well, fingers crossed. I'm sure we'll be talking to you about nuclear test veterans as well in the future. Now, speaking of some of the doom and gloom, one of the reasons for that has been Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, coming out and saying, look, we've got this £22 billion black hole. I've got to axe this. I've got to axe that. There's no money left, etc. Now, the Mirror has splashed today on a suggestion that she's going to make in her speech about going after tax dodgers. They're blamed for keeping perhaps £39 billion away from the Exchequer. So she's going to be spending some money, she says, creating some resources for the taxman, our favourite person, and that she's going to be trying to go after them. How's she going to do it, Tam?
Look, I hope that today, what we've been advised as MPs, that she will be announcing the details around that COVID corruption commissioner. So basically, how do we get to the bottom of all of these things that the likes of me have been pointing out? And I tell you what, on the floor of the House, Susie, as you may be aware, when I took to task the government, the VIP fast lane that they had, we know the issues around Baroness Moan, the Tory pair. We know the issues also, like I pointed out, more than £250 million going, in terms of a PPE contract, going not to a PPE specialist, but to a company, Ainda Capital, specializing in offshore trading and property. 11 PPE contracts going to a pest control company. For God's sake, this was absolutely diabolical. So I hope that this government is going to do what it promised and to claw back that taxpayer money. And, when we were going through the COVID pandemic, many of us lost loved ones. Like I said, I couldn't see my dying grandmother. Many other people could not be by the bedside of their dying parents. And we had all of these individuals, these corrupt individuals, trying to fleece the taxpayer, fleece the system, and they need to be held to account. And I hope in due course, once not only clawing back money, but some of these people will have charges put against them, because I think that is what your viewers will be expecting, and that is what my Slough constituents and the British people should rightly be expecting. So I hope that this is going to be a detailed investigatory process in terms of funds, but also holding people to account.
Yeah. And what do you think, everybody? Do you think Rachel Reeves needs to go after those tax dodgers? Some of them, of course, will be people who've just made a mistake. Very simply, perhaps on some smaller businesses, not the great big, super expensive corporations. Perhaps we've got the lawyers to get away from those kind of claims from the taxman. Now, Steve says, does Tan think that Keir Starmer should call a full public inquiry? Oh, well done, into the nuke blood scandal. Tan, this is the detail, as you know, if anyone who's not noticed this before, I can't believe you missed it if you watched this show. And this is the scandal about nuclear veterans who found that their medical records are missing. So, Tan, one of the things we've been calling about is a public inquiry to get to the bottom of it. Where do you stand on that?
I've been very supportive, Susie. So I would have been very, very surprised if either you or one of your viewers didn't hold me to task. So straight away, when I got the call from yourself to be on it, I knew. But that's something that I feel strongly about as well. Many of us have a great deal of respect for our veterans. They were willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for the defense of our nation, and we owe it to individuals, not just them, but to our country, to make sure that there is transparency, that there is justice. So I hope that will be the case, that we will be looking into all of these things, that there will be an inquiry. Obviously, the details of that will ultimately have to be outlined by the government, but that's something that I have been supportive of and I will continue to be supportive of.
Okay, well, fingers crossed. Hope you got an answer there, Steve, and everybody else. What do you think? Where can we get some extra money from? It's something that Rachel Reeves needs, and clearly so does everybody else. And one of the things that's going to be discussed, I think it's happening today as a vote on the floor from Unite the Union, talking about introducing a tax of 1% on the wealthiest 1%. Is that the kind of thing? I mean, that might raise about 25 billion. That would more than fill the black hole. Do you think Rachel Reeves is open to that kind of suggestion? If there's a vote, is it going to change anything?
Look, I think in terms of the £22 billion budgetary black hole that has been discovered, that was hid by the Tories, that's something that needs to be dealt with. So we said that we would balance the books, and that's exactly what the Chancellor needs to do. In terms of wealth taxes, I know that wasn't in the manifesto, so that's something that has to be fully debated. And as yet, that's not something that we've been briefed as MPs that will be happening. So I would be surprised, but then again, I'm not quite high up the pecking order to be privy to that knowledge. But from what we have been briefed, that is not something that is being proposed. There are other measures, and I'm hoping that the government will be making sure that they do not punish the poorest within our society, that there will be a fairer way of sorting out the mess left behind by the Tories. But also, we need to have a message of hope, of optimism. This should be a bright moment, because we promised change. We need to deliver that change, but we don't want to be too downbeat. It's not about austerity 2.0. It is about making sure that we take the right decisions to grow the economy, but to keep the confidence of the markets as well. It's important that there was two primary reasons why a lot of people switched votes and why they also brought us in. One was on the economy, where they thought that they could trust us with their money. And number two was that they felt once again that Labour could handle our defence and national security. So they felt, yes, now is a time. If we don't get those two things right, we will be punished. And we need to make sure that we do run a well-balanced, a well-oiled machine, but that looks after the most vulnerable in our community.
Yeah, now it's interesting you mentioned being downbeat there, because one of the stories that's been grumbling on for a long time now, since the Labour's first days in office, and which is going to cause a big stink here, probably today and maybe for the rest of the week, is the decision to means test the winter fuel payments. Now, there's about 400,000 perhaps pensioners out there who do qualify for pension credit, haven't claimed it, and are going to lose their winter fuel payment as well, which will push them over the edge perhaps. And then you've got some people, because the pension credit boundary is on a bit of a cliff edge, if you're near that edge, you just get shoved a fair bit closer to it. And there's going to be a protest here. There's going to be a group of pensioners under that wheel later on at lunchtime who are going to be protesting winter fuel payment. Unite the Union have got banners all around Liverpool about this. But let's just be honest, I don't think Rachel Reeves can really cancel that, can she? Do you think, what are you being briefed? Is there going to be anything about softening the blow for those people who are near that cliff edge?
that is what the likes of myself have been advocating to many of our colleagues, especially those making these decisions within cabinet. Look, we understand the need to balance the books. We understand the need to make sure that we are progressing with our economy, but you know, the cliff edge, the fact that the thresholds are all of a sudden somebody's eligible and they're not, a lot of those individuals still need support. So what I have been requesting our colleagues is that, look, we need to make sure that that support is there, and that threshold, that paper needs to be looked at. That's I think the key. In terms of mean testing, I know previously it was universal. And whenever a government takes away something, then there is going to be a lot of opposition to that. So and that's something that I know that whether it's the Prime Minister or the Chancellor would have been well aware, or the team should have been aware. So look, we know that whether it's millionaires and billionaires, all right, they don't need the extra £300. But there are a lot of my Slough constituents, a lot of pensioners who are just above the threshold, and they will find it difficult if they do not have that support. I'm also aware of the fact that, look, there are about 900,000 pensioners, it is estimated, who can apply for pension credit, who are eligible, but who have not yet applied. So please make sure that you go on the website, you look up and make that application, because that's very, very important. And also, the government did listen to some of what we were saying previously when this was trailed a couple of months ago, and they did extend the household support fund. So an extra £421 million was put into that as well. So, but that's good steps, but we need to make sure that we are protecting the most vulnerable.
Yeah, and that's obviously something that needs to be done. Now, what do you think about that, everybody? How do you feel about what's happening this week? Do you think the protests are justified? Do you think that, pensioners have, they're rich perhaps in homes, if not in cash? Maybe this is something that might make some people sort of relocate, maybe loosen up some equity so they can pay for these things? Or is it a terrible thing to be doing perhaps to people who've got saved up, got a tiny amount of savings or a tiny private pension of their own, and suddenly they're finding themselves penalised, and at a time, of course, when your costs of your winter fuel are far higher than they ever used to be. Now, Paul says Labour money tree for wage rises, but doing so at the expense of pensioners' welfare. Now, Paul, this is one of the things that people often raise, isn't it, Tan? And we've seen this a lot. People are talking about, well, you're giving money to the train drivers and you're giving money to the nurse, but you're taking it from older people.
Well, Susie, look, having served as a shadow rail minister for over 3 years, I know that the country was crippled by the last couple of years where the Tories weren't willing to negotiate. In fact, some of them were gunning for strikes, as I said on various occasions at events. And look, whether it's people working in our railways, whether it's our doctors, nurses, they need to be paid a fair wage. And Paul, I hear what you're saying, but let us not forget that this wasn't something that the Labour government proposed in terms of what different individuals will be paid. This is an independent review board that looks at these decisions and they make proposals. And we have got to deal with that issue as well. Look, working people need to be paid a decent wage. They are working hard to keep the country moving. And remember, whether it was the rail workers, whether it was people within the NHS, they were out there keeping the country moving. And in the midst of a pandemic, when most of us were fearful, they were the key workers. So it's no point just clapping them. We need to make sure that they have a decent wage. But the Conservatives hadn't actually factored in for this. And that's part of the 22 billion pact. That's why we had to take that decision. So I commend that particular aspect, that we've got to give people the decent wages. But it cannot be at the expense of poor pensioners. So, and let us not forget, in terms of pensioners, that the government made a manifesto commitment to the triple lock on pensions, and that is exactly what has happened. So your pension will be going up by hundreds of pounds. It went up by about £900 earlier in April. It will be going up again by approximately £460, or what the announcement will be made in October. So that will be there to ensure that pensioners under a Labour government will be not hundreds but thousands of pounds better off in the coming months and years.
If they survive the winter, of course. There's that. But Paul's got a point, and it's something that gets raised a lot. But it's got to be said, as Tam was just alluding to there, the pay rises for the public sector were things that were decided under the Conservative government, and which the Conservative government had also committed to having to do. So it wasn't a case that the people were taking money from the Labour government rather, taking money from older people and giving it to 2 train drivers or something. That money was always going to have to go to the public sector. And the Tories, which is part of what Tam was talking about there, stoking those strikes and causing some of those problems by refusing to negotiate. The argument is that was kind of done for political reasons, so that when Labour comes into power, they're the ones who've got to pay the pay rises, which the Tories are always going to have to do anyway. But they're the ones who are going to get the flack for it. I mean, the Tories played a blinder, really, didn't they? Could they put you in they've put you in the brown stuff a little bit.
But that's why we said, look, it's their inheritance and they need to own it, and we need to make sure. And look, the likes of the Mirror have been doing a great job making sure that all of that is exposed. However, there are some sections of the media who have been very Tory supportive, in fact, supporting Liz Truss and Boris Johnson through all of not just minor misdemeanors, but huge mistakes. And, sometimes it was acts of political and, social and cultural vandalism, how they undermine integrity, narcissism, all of those things. And yet now they are the ones pretending that the Tories have got nothing to do with it. No, they have got everything to do with it. So that's why we will pin it on them. But at the same time, the difficult decisions need to be taken. We need to ensure that we retain our economic credibility. So that's why I know the Chancellor, she's on a sticky wicket. I actually served in her Treasury team. I know she's very hardworking, the amount of effort and that is put in. And we're very, very proud that our first ever female Chancellor is there taking those difficult decisions. But I know that ultimately the economy will be going and she will be putting money back into people's pockets.
Okay, well, fingers crossed. Have you got any questions about that? What do you think Rachel Reeves should be doing, and how she's going after the tax dodgers? What do you feel about winter fuel payments? Get into the comments and let us know. Now, quickly, before we move on to Good News Town, obviously you're one of our first Sikh MPs. We've had a few, you're one of them, but the first one who's proud to wear his turban and so on. You must have, as a result, you've got a higher profile, now you're in office and so on. Have you experienced, I suppose you must have done, some racism as a result of being an MP? How's that? Because lots of people are talking about, we're more divided and the situation's changed. We've seen actual race riots on the streets now. Have you noticed an uptick, or is it not getting worse?
Well, look, I know that for a lot of people it is a source of great pride, as it is for me, that we have the most diverse parliament ever. We're in more women, more ethnic minorities, more people with disabilities, more LGBT plus individuals have been elected than ever before. So there is that diversity of thought, and that should enhance our democracy. However, there will be those that are individuals who are racist or sexist, homophobic. That is just unfortunately part of our society. And you will just see that just from a cursory glance at my social media feed. So if I know we follow each other on Twitter, or X as it's now called, wherever it's called. But on there, you'll see on the comments section. I mean, a lot of my team does a great deal of amount to block accounts and to make sure that the huge levels of vitriol that is excluded. However, that is just part, unfortunately, of society. But there are a lot of good people. I know that within our country, a lot of people are going about trying to tackle discrimination to have a fairer society. But you mentioned about the race riots. There were people putting out misinformation, disinformation, whether it's in terms of racist tropes, whether it's in terms of the Islamophobia. I mean, some of the stuff that was coming out was absolutely ridiculous. So I had to go in, catch up with our local police, local councillors and others to say, look, how are we going to be tackling this, because it will damage community cohesion. Look, for me, integration is key. We need to make sure that everybody's proud of their distinct identity. I'm proud to be a Sikh, I'm proud to be a turban Sikh, and I'm also proud to be British. But so what I want to do is to make sure that we have that integration. That is key, so that everybody can be proud of their distinct identity, whatever that is. But at the same time, we need to have shared values that everybody can get around, and we can't let those on the far right dictate the agenda to us. So no, I'm not going to let racists and others, deter me from what I need to do. I know what I want to do. I know how I want to go about it. And those negative people, just like generally in life, Susie, certain people will drag you down. If you surround yourself by negative people, always looking at those comments. But look, sometimes you have to read those, right? You've got to put a bit of perspective. The team tries to shield me as much as they can. But I think, you've got to develop that thick skin, and you need to battle through this, because if we don't take a stand, we will be governed by those who have got very, very different and often awful rhetoric, which they will then implement within their countries. And we've seen the rise of the far right in various other countries.
Yeah, and we've seen the Tory leadership hopeful, Robert Jenrick, who's been talking about English cultural identity being eroded and things like that. Have you had to have your own security
I'll
increased?
tell you what, look, I'm proud to be English, right? When we're watching the England football team, we're all shouting. We don't need Robert Jenrick or the Tories to be giving us lectures. It's like what I said on the floor of the House. You know, the Tories, pick up Boris Johnson. I took him to task. I said, these people drape themselves in the flag. They talk about the monarchy. They talk about the Queen on, as it was then. And then they undermine the democracy by proroguing Parliament, by doing things which are completely at odds with our values. So we don't need lectures from them. But yeah, in terms of security, that's unfortunately another one of those things that has increased. So now I can't even do my advice surgeries without security and police presence. So that, because we just don't know what individuals are. I hold 5 different advice surgeries, including on a Sunday morning. So any of my Slough constituents, feel free to get in touch.
But you have to have police there with you when you do it.
That's part of the course now, unfortunately, because not just of the advice that we've received from the Speaker's office, having received death threats, having received that abuse and so on, that is something that we have been advised, and I agree with it, because it's not just for my safety. Right? Something's going to happen, somebody's going to come for me. But I also have the safety of my staff to consider, as well as the safety of my constituents who are coming to see me. But I don't want individuals to deter us, because one of the most beautiful things about our democracy is that anybody, one of my Slough constituents, can actually come and see me directly. In certain other countries, the MPs are far aloof. They're aloof from...
A bit more like Nigel Farage, perhaps, who says that his security is so concerned about it that he can't hold those constituency surgeries. If you see him in Parliament, will you be advising him perhaps to call the local police?
I know. I've heard the comments from the Speaker's office that they do not recall ever giving such advice. In fact, the advice that I read, which was sent out to all of us, including the likes of myself, the extra security precautions, the measures that needed to be put in place, which we did, but carry on holding advice surgery. So now we've started to make sure whether it's booking appointments and whatever. But yeah, the good people of Clacton should be able to see their MP, should be able to be seen and heard. And it's no point in that individual and others giving lectures about pensioners and so on. If they're not even willing to meet the pensioners, they're not even willing to meet up with their constituents. I think there are some MPs who've been too busy, like Farage or whatever, being in the US and whatever, trying to run the political campaigns there. But no, you've been elected to serve here, so you need to meet up with constituents just like the rest of us are doing.
Yeah, exactly. And there are ways around it. If you've got security issues, Nigel, if you're watching. Now, before we let Tan go and get on with his day, and before we get to good news, is there any questions that you've got for him before we let him go? Get into the comments. Let us know, how do you feel about security? How do you feel about some of the things Tan said there about still having his constituency surgeries, but having to have a police presence, winter fuel payments, possible tax cuts or tax rises for the richest? Get into the comments, let us know. But first off, there is not all doom and gloom. We have managed to find some good news for you, and here it is. Now, this is a fantastic story. An 8-year-old boy called Isaac Tilley. Now, he has got, and it's a list of things, CLN2 Batten disease, which causes childhood dementia, epilepsy, and loss of sight. He took part in the children's version of the Welsh Ironman contest and was cheered on by the crowds as he propelled himself using a walking frame along a 500-metre course. Tan, is this proof, I suppose, that, if someone is struggling and they get the right support, they can achieve wonderful things?
How incredibly inspirational. When I read that story this morning, absolutely amazing. I know that his mum, Amy, put out a poster that, look, I can't see you, but please clap, because I know that also inspired him to complete that 500-metre challenge. But look, if somebody who is having to fight such adversity can do that, that also, I think, inspires the likes of us to be making sure that we are get up and go. And I think that it must be a very, very proud moment for his parents, and his wider family, and for him. I know his father, I understand, it was actually an Ironman, and so he competed in the Welsh version of Ironman.
Yeah, he wanted to be like his dad, so he went off and
well done, Isaac. You're a source of incredible inspiration, and I hope that you are very, very proud of your achievement.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Now, tune back in again tomorrow when we'll be having South Shields MP Emma Lil-Buck here on the news agenda to discuss the big stories of the day. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. If you've got any comments or questions, please email me, susie.boniface@mirror.co.uk, or you can find me on Twitter and Facebook. And until tomorrow, then, everybody, stay safe. Thank you for watching. Tatty bye.